4. And as I was explaining to y'all earlier, I took this outline from a Bible class I took in the past, and I gave y'all a copy of that outline, but it's just a basic, actual chronological flow of the way the Bible lays out. And just to be honest with you, it came to my knowledge when I began to really try to walk with the Lord 15 years ago, 16 years ago now. I was saved as a little kid, but I really never walked with the Lord until I got to be an adult. And when I really started, wanting to learn the Bible, got hungry for the Bible, God started opening up my eyes and stuff. I realized as I spoke and talked to people, they didn't understand just the simplest things. And it gave me a passion not only for me to learn those things, but to pass them on to somebody else. And so here I am. That's just what I feel called to do. So anyway, that's kind of where this class, comes from, that, and, just an opportunity, because during Awanas, we all come, we drop the kids off, and we got that time. And so I wanted to use that time for a Bible study. And so I thought, the 10 simple steps that I learned in Faith Bible Institute, what a great outline, that we can walk and talk our way through the Bible, and we can get as deep in any step we want to get into, or we can, cover it however we need to. And so we start out with the beginning in Genesis, and Genesis is a book of beginnings. It's not just one beginning or two beginnings, it's multiple beginnings. And so we have the creation of the universe and man right at the beginning, and we find out where we came from, where the universe came from. But then, after God creates a perfect universe, right? He does create a perfect universe. Adam and Eve decide to take of the fruit that they were told not to take of. And when they do, exactly what God said would happen. They spiritually die and physically begin to die. And they receive curses, right? Adam, Eve, and the serpent all receive a curse that we all pay for to this very day. We can trace male problems, female problems, and issues with that stinking serpent all the way back to that moment in time. But at the same time, God gave the greatest verse too, that he would crush the serpent's head, right, with the seed of the woman, which was, the first mention of salvation in Genesis 3:15. So we also received that. But then, as the world progressed from there, it was still a really lush, tropical, not perfect, but close to perfect environment. People were living almost 1,000 years, and they were smart. There's technology that was going on in that time frame we're still figuring out. I mean, they had some stuff going on. We probably would be shocked to find out how far advanced they really were. We think we're so smart. If we found out what they were doing back then, we'd probably be like, wow, they were really smart. But regardless of that, they just grew away from God and got, reliant on their own abilities, and they became evil. The intent of their heart became totally evil. And so it got to the point where, there was only one, godly family left on earth, and so God, he told that man Noah to build an ark. It never had rained. Never had rained. But he told him to build an ark, a boat. He told him exactly how to build it. And imagine, spending 100 years building a boat for a flood that nobody had ever heard of or seen. So, he probably took a lot of scrutiny. But nevertheless, the flood happened, just as God said it would, and God protected Noah and his family in that ark, 8 people. But that created a new world. The world was no longer that paradise, almost perfect type world anymore, after the waters broke from beneath and fell from above. And, it was violent, and it killed all living flesh outside of those in the ark and some of the sea life. And so we have this new world. So the world, like what we have today, obviously it's progressed since then, and it's digressed since then, actually. But the world that we have now, that ended up dividing into continents and those kind of things. And then, even after that, the flood, and God establishes the new world through Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's 3 sons and their families. We have the Tower of Babel, where they were all united. They were all of one voice. They were all of one heart. And God said the intent of their hearts are evil. And they're building this tower to worship, and I'm paraphrasing. You guys can go back and look at it. But he says, they want to worship themselves. They want to worship the works of their hands. They want to worship this tower. They want to use this tower to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. And a ton of, almost all actually, probably, idolatry and false God doctrine can go back to the Tower of Babel. That's where a lot of it started. And so God said that he would confound their tongue at the Tower of Babel. And that's when people began to separate into groups that sounded and looked like they did, so they could communicate. And so that God is the reason why we have nations. He ordained that because, when they all had the same heart and the same tongue, they did the same evil, and it wasn't good. And so we have the beginning of the nation. So that's the beginning of the big stuff. There's a lot of other beginnings in there if you really want to know the truth, but that's the beginning of the big stuff, and it's really interesting to know kind of our genesis, our beginning, where all of it came from. But then God took and called out a man that was a descendant of Shem, one of Noah's sons, named Abraham. And we studied him, and it's very important that we know that this Hebrew man that God called out, the line is through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, does anybody remember why that's important, that it's through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And we emphasize it big time.
Because Abraham and Ishmael, it goes the wrong way.
That's right. Why would it be a big deal, though, to say Ishmael? Ishmael was his firstborn.
Well, because he took into his own hands instead of God's hands.
That's right. So God selects this man, Abraham, tells him to take his family, or take his wife, and his people, and get up out of that country to a land that he was showing. And we find out later that Abraham is counted righteous because he believed God. Just simple faith. He's counted righteous, and that's us too. We also are saved through faith. And so, but he made him a promise that his wife of old age, Sarah, who'd been barren, would have a child, but they will take matters into their own hands, as Joe just said, and they get tired of waiting on God. And Sarah has a great idea that her Egyptian handmaid, she can bear you a son, Abraham, and Abraham's like, okay, works for me. And he goes and has a child with Hagar, and Ishmael is born, but God doesn't pass the promise down to Ishmael, does he? Because that wasn't the promise. The promise was that God was going to do a miraculous work through Abraham and Sarah. And so he does. He fulfills that promise later on, and then there's division between Isaac, the son of promise, and Ishmael, the son of, the works of their own hands. And there still is division between those two this very day. And there will be until the Lord makes it all right. But in regards to that, it's very important to know that, when you're looking at Israel and you're looking back at their history, that God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the living God. And so we establish the Hebrew fathers, and you could name that step really Israel. You could just name that step Israel if you want. Everybody wants to know, why is Israel talked about all the time? Why is such a big deal? What's the whoop about Israel? Why are they always in the news? Because God made a nation out of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what was the big deal about God making a nation? What was he going to do with them? That matters to any of us.
Send a son, send a savior.
That's right. He was going to fulfill that Genesis 3:15 promise of crushing the head of the serpent with the seed of the woman through this nation. So who did Jesus come to the earth through? Through Israel, right? Through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we can trace Mary and Joseph back. Of course, Joseph was his legal father, not his real father. But Mary was his mother, and they're both Jews. And, of course, there's more important stuff about their genealogies than that. But in regards to that, God makes this set-aside, holy nation through these Hebrew fathers. And he does it to come to the earth. It's his plan to execute coming to the earth. And so this nation, though, Jacob, he has how many sons? Remember anybody? 12. And so he takes these 12 sons, and what does God change Jacob's name into? Israel. And so God, develops and changes Jacob into a nation. And his 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And he had his favorite son. What was his name? Joseph. And so where did Joseph end up going to ultimately to save the world? Literally. He literally saved the world, right? It wasn't like a salvation of our souls like Jesus. Nobody could do that in Jesus, but he literally saved the world from famine, didn't he? From starvation, and he went to be a prince of Egypt, and we can look at that story sometime or read that if you never have. But nevertheless, after Joseph dies, a new Pharaoh comes along. The Egyptians look around. They say, "Man, there's a lot of these Hebrews around here, and there's more of them than us. And what if they side with our enemies and become an enemy to us? What are we going to do?" And so we have this issue now where the Pharaoh has this plan. Remember, he had plan A, plan B, and plan C. He was trying to kill off all the male babies. And we just got through looking at that in the last couple of weeks. But ultimately, one of those babies that was supposed to be killed got put in a little ark. And the mom hid it in the bulrushes over in the water close to where Pharaoh's daughter would go to bathe. And we learned in Hebrews 11 she did that through faith. And nevertheless, God uses this special baby to be raised as a prince in Egypt, but then he sees the oppression of his own people. He knows he's a Hebrew. And he sees the oppression of his own people, and it bothers him, and he ends up killing a guy, and then his own people kind of turn on him, and he just says, I'm out of here, and he goes to the wilderness, right? But then he meets God. He gets married, has a family, but he meets God in the burning bush. And God says, I am the I am that I am. You tell him I sent you. You know, we went through all that. And so in the last couple of weeks, we looked how, the Israelites were now under oppression in Egypt. They were using them to build all their buildings, and they were putting them under hard labor, and they were just now, instead of a blessed nation within Egypt, they were an oppressed nation within Egypt. And they've been crying out to God through their oppression. So God's going to use this special guy, Moses, to deliver them. And we saw last week how, he did the plagues, and then the last plague was the Passover. We talked about the significance of the Passover. But then after the Passover, he leads them out in a very uncharacteristic path. They end up going right towards the mighty Red Sea, where, if they get into any sort of situation, they got three options. They can go across the Red Sea, which is not going to work for millions of people. They can go across the mountains, which is not going to work for millions of people, or they could go back where they came, and that'd be going back to Egypt. And by the way, Egypt's already decided now that they're ticked, and Pharaoh's got his armies coming after them. So, they're in a mess. And they cry out to Moses and say, what'd you do, lead us out here to kill us? They just totally turn on him after he leads them out. And God says, be still and see the salvation of the Lord. And the Lord tells him to put that staff in the water, and poof, the waters separate, and there's a wall on each side, and they walk across on dry ground. And so we looked at that, and at the end of last week, though, we saw once they get on the other side, God closes the sea on the Egyptian armies, kills them, and he brings a great mighty victory to Israel, and they're set free. They're set to head to the promised land. Moses heads up on the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments, he gets the law. But you remember what one of the times he comes back down from the mountain, what had happened? We looked at that last week just real quick. When he comes back down from the mountain, remember all that jewelry God told them before they left? That's right. God had told them before they left to take of the spoil of Egypt, and take their jewelry, their gold, their silver. Well, they took a little bit of that gold and that silver. When Moses stayed up on the mountain a little bit too long, and they said, we need a God to worship, And so Aaron says, all right, give me all your gold earrings and stuff. And he melts it into a cast or whatever and makes them a golden calf. And Moses comes down from the mountain, and they're worshiping false gods, And God, wasn't very pleased by that. Neither was Moses. So we have that issue happen. Then also we have the situation where Moses, remember, he got angry when God told him to strike the rock and the water would come out. And instead of striking the rock once, he strikes it twice in his anger. And God tells him that he's not going to get to see the promised land because of that. And so Moses, who led him out of Exodus to the promised land, is not going to get to lead him into the promised land. He leads them right to the edge, and he gets to see over the mountain into it, but he didn't get to take them because of that. And also,
It seems so severe.
It is.
You
don't doubt God.
That one little
Don't
thing.
doubt God.
Moses had an issue with his temper more than once, He broke the stone tablets, and God had to make them again.
See?
Besides that, so we didn't spend a ton of time looking at Moses' life, and I'm not trying to be hard on Moses. I think it was God's plan for Moses to get him to the edge and for somebody else to lead him over. Another thing that's possible, that's very possible, is that Moses became too big. He became too big for him. Let's just look. So now we're at the end of a recap and looking into the end. Let's look at the end of Deuteronomy real quick. And so, you got the first 5 books of the Bible. You guys remember what they're called? the name of them?
First 5 books.
Yeah.
Pentateuch.
The Pentateuch is one name for them, and the Hebrew name for it would have been the Torah, which means law. And before, it was just one book. The book of the law, the Torah, was everything from Genesis through Deuteronomy. It was one big book. But then the Greeks, if I'm saying that right, I believe it was them that separated it into the 5 vessels, which is what Pentateuch means, 5 vessels. And so they separated it into 5 books. But these are the books of Moses, or the law of Moses, and he wrote these 5 books, and it is a great historical document that gets us from the beginning of time all the way to the edge of this nation God has made to be separate and holy and come to the earth through being right on the edge of going into the promised land. And Moses penned those 5 books, and there's a lot of evidence in the Bible that Moses was the author of those books, by the way. So if anybody wants to know, how do you know Moses wrote it? Well, the Bible tells us that. And like I say all the time, the best commentary on the Bible is the Bible. And there's plenty of verses for that. But so if we look back here in Deuteronomy, and we'll get to the part real quick in a minute about Moses dying. But let's look real quick in 31, chapter 31 of Deuteronomy. If you go to Joshua and just flip back a few pages, you'll get into Deuteronomy 31. I'm going to look at verse 14, and we'll read a few verses here. And I'm only trying to establish the passing of the torch right here, because we're at the end of Moses' life. We know, as we just talked about, God has made this decision that Moses won't go into the promised land, but he'll lead them up to it. But then now there's the passing of the baton, because Moses he was the voice of God to this nation. God spoke to Moses, Moses spoke to the people, and the people saw the glory of God on Moses so much that he'd have to cover himself at times when he'd come back and talking with God. And so Moses was really sought after high regard to the Israelites. And so it says in verse 14 of chapter 31, and the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, the days approach that thou must die. Call Joshua, and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the congregation, that I may give him charge. And Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tabernacle of the congregation. Anybody remember what was special in the previous generation about the young Joshua? What made him stand out already years back? Remember last week we looked real quick at the end. They got in position to take Jericho 40 years ago.
He wasn't scared of the giants.
That's right.
Jericho, the big
He and
guys.
Caleb was a part of the spies. Joshua would have been somewhere around 40-something years old, about mine Scott's age, would have been Caleb and Joshua. They'd have been considered young men in that time. And they went as young men with that group of spies and to look in to the promised land. And when they went in there to look, they were the only 2 out of the group who believed God could deliver them. They were like, let's go. Especially Caleb. He was like, come on, we got it. But everybody else was like, man, we're like grasshoppers to those giants. They'll crush us. And God tells them that you're going to wander in the wilderness for your lack of faith. And that the only 2 of you that are here that will see the promised land are Caleb and Joshua. Now there's other instances where we see God using Joshua too. But here's where God charges Joshua with the charge of being their new leader. And so verse 15 said, And the Lord appeared in the tabernacle in a pillar of a cloud. And the pillar of the cloud stood over the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers. And this people will rise up, and they'll go a-whoring after other gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me, and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, Are not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? They're going to ask that question when they have this separation from God. And he says, And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they shall have wrought, in that they are turned unto other gods. Now therefore, he says to Moses, Write ye this song for you, and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. For when I shall have brought them into the land which I swear unto their fathers, that floweth with milk and honey, and they shall have eaten and filled themselves, and waxen fat, that they will turn unto other gods, and serve them, and provoke me, and break my covenant. And it shall come to pass, when many evils and troubles are befallen them, that this song shall testify against them as a witness. For it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. For I know their imagination, which they go about, and even now, before I have brought them into the land which I swear. Moses therefore wrote this song the same day, and taught it to the children of Israel. And he gave Joshua the son of Nun a charge, and said, Be strong and of good courage, for thou shalt bring the children of Israel into the land which I swear unto them, and I will be with thee. So he tells Moses to write a song, and he tells Joshua to be strong and of good courage, because I'm going to be with you to bring you into the land. And those two things are super important, because Joshua's going to have a major battle on his hands getting into these lands. And if he has to face that mighty wall of Jericho and that mighty army of Jericho along his own, I'm not so sure he'd have done it. But if he's strong and courageous and believes in the Lord, man, God's going to fight the battle for him. And that's one of my favorite things about this next step we're about to get in here, is how God fights the battle for them. I mean, you know, they just do what he says, and boom, God does the work, and it's great. But also, Moses says there's going to be a day when they're in that land flowing with milk and honey, they're going to turn from me. And I want you to teach this song in their mouth that's all about my deliverance. And I want it to be taught to their seed and their seed, because then they're going to remember. They're not going to be able to say, you know, where's God at? Why did he leave us? Because they're going to know, I already knew they were going to do it. You know? And so Moses does write that song, and that's one of the last things that he does. And now the baton has somewhat been passed to Joshua between God and Moses and Joshua. But if we flip over now to the very end of Deuteronomy, we see where Joshua is also gets this baton passed to him in front of the people. So let's just look at chapter 34, the last chapter of Deuteronomy. And it says, And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, and unto the utmost sea, and the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, unto Zoar. And the Lord said unto him, This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob. Remember? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It's important that we remember that, because God obviously emphasizes it, right? And so he says, I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. Nobody knew where Moses was buried. So we'll get back to that. And Moses was 120 years old when he died, and his eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. In other words, he was still hopping. I mean, he was coordinated, he was strong, he still had good vision. I mean, he was a vibrant man when God appointed him to die. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose none prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and the wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and to all his land. And in all that mighty hand, and in all that great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel. So, why would the Lord bury Moses in a sepulcher that nobody's seen ever, by the way? Not just until the day this was written. Nobody knows exactly where the bones of Moses have been rested. Why would he do that? What's some possibilities? Why? What did we just say about Moses?
So they didn't worship him.
Exactly. And that's what they would have done. And guess who knew that?
Moses.
Moses knew it, but God knew it, and the devil also knew it. We go to Jude, and I haven't prepared for this, but I remember it in my mind. If you go to Jude, and Jude's such a short book, we can flip over there real quick, it won't take us long to find it. But let's flip over to Jude. Jude is a one-pager, one-chapter book. But Jude tells us that there was actually a contest between, I think Michael, the Archangel Michael, if I may be wrong. I think it was Michael that contends with him. I have a brand new Bible that I really like, but the pages in between the books stick together. Verse 9, okay.
There it is.
Alright, so, let me see if I can keep this one written. And so, and Jude tells us, that in verse 9, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. Durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuked thee. So my whole point in reading that right there was just to show you that there was even a fight between Satan and the archangel Michael over the body of Moses. So that tells us right there that God knew what they would do, Moses knew what they would do, and the devil also knew what they would do, and he wanted to expose where the body of Moses would be buried. Because, you know, it didn't take them a whole lot of faith to see Moses did it. You know, Moses would go and he would have this action with God, this talk with God, and there was times where he would be so bright they couldn't even look at him. And so, you know, they could see that. And so, for them to have faith in God, they needed Moses out of the picture. Moses had gotten too big. And it wasn't Moses' fault, but that was just the way it was. We can be that way too if we're not careful. We put too much faith in the man of God rather than the God of the man. You know, we got to be real careful of that. That's our purpose and reason for everything is God, not the man of God.
And also show that their connection with God didn't die with Moses.
That's right.
It was left with Joshua, and it continued on.
Yeah,
you know.
That's right. They were promised that God was going to be there. You know, he was going to make them a great nation. He was going to bless the whole entire earth through them. You know, all of the song that Moses gave them, you know, and everything else was to remind them of all the mighty works God did. And so he wasn't going to go away because Moses went away. He is an eternal God, an everlasting God. And so we only got a couple more minutes, but let's introduce now that we're to that point. Now we see that Joshua is now steps in as the leader of Israel. Let's take just a quick look at that. So God has already charged Joshua in front of Moses, but now he's going to reaffirm that charge. Okay? And so does anybody know the way to say Joshua in Hebrew? I'm not no Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew expert, but Yeshua. Yeshua.
I needed something.
And so, does anybody know how to say the name Jesus in Hebrew?
Jesus.
Yeshua. It's Yeshua. It's the same name. Jesus is the Greek, and Joshua, you know, I'm not an expert, but if you take the Greek form and make it into English, it's Joshua. If you take the Greek form and make it into English, it's Jesus, but it's the same name. It's Yeshua. So he had the same, you know, name that Jesus also would be named. But anyway, let's just take a look here. The first 9 verses or so here. And after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, this is chapter 1, verse 1 of Joshua. It came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister or servant, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, into the land which I give to them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that I have given unto you, as I said unto Moses. You notice what he says there too? He didn't say that you will get when you get there. He said that he's already given it to them. You just got to go get it. That's kind of like our salvation, right? It's already there. We just got to go get it. Accept it. It's that simple for us. It's like opening a gift on Christmas. You just got to open it up. But he says, from the wilderness, and this Lebanon, unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. That's a good promise right there, too. Be strong and of good courage. Now this is number 2 time that he's told him this, right? Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. And I love those verses right there because they're so relevant to his situation, and they're so relevant to mine and yours. I mean, it's not any real difference, except for we're probably not facing near the battle he was, just to be honest with you. But we have our individual battles, but we can learn a lot from those verses. I love verse 7. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou may prosper whithersoever thou go. This book of law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. I mean, that's worth reading a second time, because it's just as relevant today. And the best news for us is we got the complete and entire perfect Word of God that we can read, meditate in day and night, stay in our lane, you know, don't go left, don't go right, stay in God's lane, stay in God's way. And if we do that, we'll be prosperous too. And God will keep our path and keep our ways and see us through the different valleys and trials in life. And I don't know about y'all, but I have a bunch of those. It seems like pretty regularly there's something going on. And without God, I'd be in trouble. So, you know, these are lessons that happen in history. There's different context, generationally speaking, but man, these principles are eternal. And they're applicable to our lives just as they were his back then. But so getting ready for next week, now that we're in this step of the Promised Land, we're going to see Joshua assume command officially of this nation, now that God has affirmed his charge with him. And then they're going to send spies in again, remember? They did that back 40 years ago. They sent in a bunch of spies, but this time they're just going to send in 2 guys. Does anybody remember who these 2 guys meet? She's in the birth line of the Savior, Rahab. That's right, so we're going to see these 2 spies go in, and we'll read about it next week, but Rahab is a type and a picture of who, if you really want to get down to it? Us. Because she's a what? She's not an Israelite, is she? She's not a Hebrew, she's a Gentile. And so she's a wretched sinner. She's, you know, lost, but she has faith. She believes in the God of Israel. She's heard the mighty acts of the God of Israel, and she does what she does to help them because she believes. And then they give her this command of what she can do to be saved. That's right. The scarlet thread, same color as blood. So anyway, we'll look at that next week, and it's just amazing, you know, God will save anybody that will turn to him. And, you know, we've been looking at what happens to people who, you know, harden their heart towards God too, right? It's not good. And these people in this land, they've had years and years, and I'll try to research that some next week, but these are nations that have had their chances to repent too, and their hearts are hard, you know. And we're going to see Jericho, you know, Rahab and her family, they get saved. But could have the whole nation gotten saved?
Oh, yeah.
They could have, right? But that's the problem, is people don't turn to the Lord, they don't repent, they don't accept that free gift. So anyway, we'll look at that next week, and we'll look at the Promised Land probably for a couple of weeks, but we won't stay in it for a long time, and then we'll move on to the step after that. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming, and appreciate y'all coming. Joe, you close us out?
Sure. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for all the many blessings you bestow on us, for your grace and mercy. We give you all the praise. Lord, please be with everything tonight. Thank you for being present with us tonight as we study your word. Please show us the way. Please be with the preacher tonight with his message, and with the shower that's going on tonight, and with all the people that are in need of your mercy, in need of your help. All those that are helping for the sick and the loved ones, all those that are sick. And please continue to show us the way. And thank you, Lord. Please be with us in your name. Amen. Not a good evening.
How was it?
Not too good.
Is it charged?
We got about
Oh,
30% of
sure,
it.
it's quite a bit, I would think.
Oh, yeah, right.
45 minutes or more.
You got to use it yet?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank y'all for coming.